Your driver is lying. 4 words. Spoken just above a whisper. Yet inside that ballroom of crystal and chandeliers, those 4 words landed louder than the jazz quartet, louder than the laughter, louder than the polished hum of every powerful conversation happening at once. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The clinking glasses. The orchestrated charm. The carefully rehearsed compliments of Atlanta's wealthiest evening. All of it suspended, in the small space between a billionaire and a little girl. Malcolm Reed turned slowly toward the voice. At 47, Malcolm had built one of America's largest logistics empires from a single warehouse in Georgia. 2 decades of negotiation. 2 decades of reading rooms, reading people, reading silences. It was a man accustomed to hearing numbers. It was not accustomed to hearing a warning. Especially not from someone who barely reached his elbow. The girl couldn't have been older than 8. Dark curls gathered into neat braids. A simple navy dress that looked almost out of place among the silk gowns surrounding her. A thin silver bracelet resting loosely on her wrist, catching the chandelier light in tiny flickers. Her sneakers were clean but worn at the edges, the kind that had walked through ordinary places, not red carpets. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't asking for anything. She wasn't pulling at his sleeve the way a child seeking attention might. She simply looked at him. The way someone looks when they know something everyone else has missed. Malcolm lowered the glass in his hand. "What did you say?" he asked quietly. Around them, a few guests turned, sensing the strange shift in the air. The girl stepped slightly closer, her brown eyes fixed steadily on his. "Your driver is lying," she repeated. The words sent a small, unexpected chill through Malcolm's chest. Before he could answer, another voice cut smoothly through the moment. "Sir, is everything all right?" Trevorhes approached with the kind of calm only earned through years of practice. Though polished. Professional in every visible way. Trevor had worked for Malcolm for 6 years. He knew the schedules, the routes, the meal preferences. The briefcases. He knew which appointments could be moved and which could not. If Malcolm trusted anyone outside his executive team, it was Trevor. The driver glanced briefly at the girl. Just for an instant, his smile thinned. Then it returned. Flawless. Familiar. "Is there a problem?" Trevor asked. A few of the nearby guests chuckled politely. One woman shook her head with that easy condescension of the wealthy. "Kids say the funniest things." Another lifted his glass. "Maybe she's been watching too many detective movies." Malcolm looked between them. The contrast was almost comic. On one side, a man who had driven him through 6 years of storms, deals, late-night flights, and emergency boardrooms without a single mistake. On the other side, a child he had never seen before tonight, holding her ground in a room that wasn't built for her. Logic told him the conversation should already be over. But something stopped him. Her face wasn't angry. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the face of a child playing a game. It was concern. Steady, quiet, certain concern. "What makes you think that?" Malcolm asked. She hesitated. The room dimmed a half-step in his perception, the way rooms do when something matters more than what's happening around it. "Because I saw him," she said. Trevor's jaw tightened. So briefly that almost no one would have noticed. Almost no one, except a man who had built a fortune on noticing. Malcolm felt a small knot form in his stomach. It wasn't evidence. It wasn't proof. It wasn't even, technically, an accusation. But it was enough to plant a question. And questions had built his entire life. Trevor let out a soft, easy laugh. "Sir, I think there's been some misunderstanding." The guests relaxed. Conversations rose again. The music drifted back into the foreground. The moment should have ended there. But as Malcolm turned, he caught it. Used a glance. Trevor wasn't looking at the girl anymore. He was looking through the tall glass windows, toward the parking garage outside. And for the first time that night, Malcolm wondered if the child standing in front of him had just opened the first page of something much, much larger. The night in. His stomach did not loosen. Across the ballroom, conversations had returned to their easy rhythm. Waiters drifted between tables with silver trays. The jazz quartet eased into something slower, something almost intimate. Though every other guest in that room, the moment with the little girl had already evaporated. To Malcolm, it was still there. He glanced back. She was standing quietly beside a marble column, half hidden behind the crowd. Not watching the auction. Not watching the desserts. Not even watching him. She was watching Trevor. That alone struck him as strange. Most children in this room would have been overwhelmed. Distracted by the lights, the music, the towers of pastries near the stage. But Amara, as he would learn her name was, seemed focused on a single point in the room. Trevor moved closer and lowered his voice. "I'm sorry about that, sir. Kids, they misunderstand things. She probably saw me checking the vehicle before your arrival." Malcolm nodded slowly. "Maybe. The security team asked for double inspections tonight," Trevor added. "You know how these events get." It sounded reasonable. It sounded, in fact, exactly like something Trevor would say. Responsible. Prepared. Reliable. Every quality Malcolm had trusted for years. But there was something else. A small movement. Barely visible. Trevor kept adjusting his cufflink. Malcolm had built his career reading people. Investors, rivals, partners across negotiation tables. The smallest habits told the biggest truths. And Trevor only touched that cufflink when he was nervous. Malcolm had seen it once before. 3 years ago, during a contract dispute that nearly cost the company millions. He had seen it again during an unexpected federal audit. Now, in a ballroom of golden light and easy laughter, the habit had returned. "Sir?" Trevor asked. "Is everything all right?" Malcolm forced a smile. "Of course." Trevor relaxed. "Good. The mayor wanted a few minutes with you before the auction begins." Malcolm nodded and watched him walk away. The pasture professional. The pace, a fraction too quick. Near the column, Amara still had not moved. He crossed the ballroom toward her, weaving through. Guests holding champagne flutes and rehearsed smiles. Crystal lights scattered across the polished floor. "What's your name?" he asked. "Amara." "Amara, do you know who I am?" She nodded once. "Everybody here knows who you are." He folded his arms. "Then why would you tell a stranger something like that?" She looked down at the silver bracelet on her wrist before answering. Her voice was quiet, but there was nothing uncertain about it. Because nobody else was paying attention. He waited. Paying attention to what? For the first time, real hesitation crossed her face. She seemed to weigh how much to say. Finally, she looked up. "I saw him leave the garage earlier. And he came back different." The phrase sounded impossible. Different how? She paused, struggling for the right word. "I don't know. But when he came back, he looked worried. He kept checking his watch, and looking outside. It wasn't evidence. It was barely an observation. A grown man in his world would have laughed it off and ordered another drink. But Malcolm didn't laugh. Because she wasn't inventing. She wasn't dramatizing. She was describing exactly what she believed she had seen, no more, no less. That kind of honesty was rare even among adults. A burst of applause rose across the ballroom as the auction host stepped onto the stage. The room brightened beneath spotlights. The crowd turned forward. The energy shifted. Malcolm glanced toward the stage. Then back at Amara. But something pulled his eyes past her, toward the far exit. Trevor was standing near the glass doors. Not watching the auction. Not watching the crowd. Staring through the glass, toward the parking garage. And for one fraction of a second, when Trevor realized Malcolm was watching, the color seemed to drain from his face. Malcolm held the driver's gaze for only a heartbeat. Then Trevor looked away and forced a smile toward a group of donors entering the ballroom. It was brief. Almost invisible. But Malcolm had built entire companies on details smaller than that. The auction host began thanking sponsors beneath bright stage lights, but Malcolm barely heard a word. His attention drifted between the stage, the glass doors, and the little girl beside him. Amara folded her hands together, glancing again toward the windows. He keeps doing it, she said quietly. Doing what? Looking outside. Malcolm followed her gaze. Trevor was now speaking with a member of the security staff near the entrance. Everything appeared normal. Yet every few seconds, his eyes shifted, toward the lower garage visible across the courtyard. You've been watching him all night? Malcolm asked. She shook her head. Not all night. Just after I saw him come back. Come back from where? The lower garage. From it. The lower garage was reserved for executive vehicles and private staff access. Guests didn't go down there. Why were you there? She hesitated. My aunt works in catering. He was helping carry dessert trays. That explained everything. She wasn't crashing the gala. She wasn't a guest. She was a child quietly helping an adult finish a long shift. And what exactly did you see? He asked. Before she answered, applause erupted as a donor pledged $200,000 for a scholarship program. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead like frozen stars. When the noise faded, she lowered her voice. I saw him open your vehicle. That's his job. I know. Then what was unusual? She stared at the bracelet around her wrist for a moment, choosing her words carefully. He looked around first. Malcolm said nothing. Then he opened the rear door, and he reached under one of the seats. A faint tightening crossed his chest. Did he take something out? I couldn't tell. Did he put something in? I couldn't tell that either. She looked frustrated by her own answer. It happened fast. Logic immediately rose to defend Trevor. The driver had access to that vehicle every day. Opening compartments, checking spaces, that was routine. But Tamara's restraint was disarming. She wasn't claiming more than she had seen. She wasn't filling in the blanks the way a dishonest witness would. If anything, she was being careful. Across the ballroom, Trevor checked his watch. Then he excused himself from the security officer and moved toward the exit. Where is he going? Amara whispered. Malcolm did not answer. Through the glass, he watched Trevor disappear into the night beyond the courtyard lights. Less than 30 seconds later, his phone vibrated. A message. From Trevor. Sir, I'm stepping outside for a quick vehicle check before your departure. Everything is fine. Malcolm read it twice. Everything is fine. The words should have reassured him. Instead, they did the opposite. Because in 6 years of working together, Trevor had never once felt the need to explain himself, before being asked. A server passed by with sparkling water. Laughter rose from a nearby table. The auction host announced another donation, drawing applause. Everything looked perfectly normal. But the message in his pocket felt wrong. Not because of what it said. Because Trevor had sent it at all. Malcolm slipped the phone away and looked through the glass doors toward the courtyard. Beyond the fountain and the rows of trimmed hedges stood the entrance to the parking garage. Trevor was nowhere in sight. You think he's hiding something, don't you? Amara asked quietly. Malcolm looked down at her. I think there's probably a simple explanation. The answer sounded less convincing, even to himself. She nodded politely, but her expression said she didn't agree. Before he could speak again, one of his assistants approached. "Sir, the mayor would like a moment before he leaves." Malcolm glanced toward the stage where local officials were gathering for photographs. Every instinct told him to walk straight outside. But discipline is what separated Malcolm Reed from the men he had outlasted. He didn't act on assumptions. "Tell him I'll be there in a minute," he said. The assistant disappeared into the crowd. When Malcolm turned back, Amara was watching the garage entrance again. "What is it?" he asked. She hesitated. "Maybe nothing." "Tell me anyway." She took a slow breath. "When I saw him downstairs, he wasn't alone." Malcolm felt a small spark move through him. "You didn't mention that." "I wasn't sure if it mattered." "Who was with him?" She shook her head. "I couldn't see clearly." "Used someone wearing a gray jacket." "A man?" "I think so." "Did they talk?" "Yes." "Could you hear them?" "No." The answer left more questions than it solved. "Why didn't you tell security?" he asked. She lowered her eyes. "Because nobody listens to kids." The simple honesty of that sentence caught him off guard. Before he could respond, movement appeared outside. Trevor emerged from the direction of the garage and began walking back toward the building. His pace looked calm. His posture looked controlled. But the moment he stepped under the courtyard lights, Malcolm noticed something. Trevor stopped halfway to the entrance. He turned around. Stared back toward the garage. For several seconds. As though checking whether someone was still down there. Then he continued walking, smooth and professional, as if the pause had never happened. It lasted only an instant. It was enough. Seconds later, Trevor entered the ballroom with his usual professional smile. "Everything is ready for your departure, sir." His voice sounded steady. His appearance, flawless. Yet Malcolm noticed a faint sheen of perspiration near his collar, despite the cool evening air. "Good," Malcolm replied. Trevor smiled. "The vehicle is exactly where it should be." Malcolm held his gaze. "I'm glad to hear that." For the first time all night, Trevor's smile hesitated. Only for a fraction of a second. Then it returned. But Tamara had seen it too. It could tell, from the way her small hand tightened around the silver bracelet on her wrist. The rest of the gala moved in a blur of speeches, applause, polite conversations. Malcolm barely registered any of it. Every time someone spoke about charity or community or new partnerships, his thoughts drifted back to the garage. Trevor remained nearby throughout the auction. Efficient. Calm. Coordinating small details before anyone else even noticed they were needed. To everyone watching, he looked exactly like the dependable employee Malcolm had trusted for years. That should have settled the matter. Instead, it made Malcolm even more uneasy. Shortly after 10 o'clock, the final auction item closed. Guests began gathering coats. Luxury sedans pulled away one after another beneath the glow of valet lights. The ballroom slowly emptied. Malcolm scanned the room for Amara. He found her helping a catering employee stack empty dessert trays near the service entrance. Her silver bracelet caught the light as she worked. For a moment she looked like any ordinary child finishing a long evening with a hard-working aunt. Yet she had become the reason an uncomfortable question refused to leave his mind. He walked toward her. "The event is ending," he said. She nodded. "I know. Your aunt is still here?" "She's cleaning the kitchen." He glanced toward the front entrance. Then made a decision. "Come with me." She blinked. "Where?" "Outside." Surprise flickered briefly across her face. "Why?" He looked toward the glass doors leading to the courtyard. "Because I want to see something for myself." They stepped into the night air together. The sounds of the gala faded behind them as the doors closed. A gentle breeze moved through the hedges. Somewhere beyond the buildings, downtown Atlanta hummed steady and indifferent. The parking garage stood nearly 100 yards away, quiet beneath rows of white lights. Trevor saw them immediately. He straightened beside the black SUV and offered a professional smile. "Ready to head home, sir?" Malcolm returned the smile. "Almost." Trevor's eyes flicked briefly toward Amara before returning to Malcolm. "Everything's been prepared." "Good." Malcolm walked toward the vehicle slowly. The polished paint reflected the courtyard lights. The windows were spotless. Nothing seemed unusual. Amara stayed silent beside him. He walked around the SUV once. Then a second time. Trevor watched calmly. "Is there something you need checked?" Malcolm rested a hand against the rear door. "Not really." Trevor's shoulders relaxed. Then Malcolm opened the door. He inspected the back seat. The floor mats. The storage pockets. Every visible compartment. Several long seconds passed. Nothing. No device. No package. No suspicious object. Nothing at all. Trevor allowed himself a small laugh. "I told you everything was fine." Malcolm slowly closed the door. The courtyard suddenly felt colder. Amara stared at the vehicle in disbelief. Trevor's confidence had returned completely. For the first time all evening, he looked truly comfortable. And as Malcolm glanced from the empty interior to the disappointed expression on the little girl's face, he wondered, for one weak, tired moment, whether he had just made a serious mistake by listening to her at all. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. The courtyard lights reflected across the black SUV. A distant fountain murmured somewhere behind them. Trevor stood with quiet confidence beside the vehicle. The tension that had followed him all night appeared, finally, to have lifted. Malcolm felt a wave of frustration settle over him. He had opened compartments. Checked beneath seats. Searched every obvious place. Nothing. Trevor smiled politely. "Would you like me to bring the vehicle around, sir?" Malcolm exhaled slowly. "No. Not yet." Trevor nodded. "Of course." Amara remained silent. The disappointment in her face was impossible to miss. She was looking down at the pavement, replaying every moment she had witnessed in the garage. Malcolm felt a brief pang of guilt. She was only a child. Whatever she thought she had seen, she had clearly believed it. "Amara," he said gently. "Sometimes things aren't exactly what they appear to be." She looked up. "I know what I saw." Quiet. Steady. No apology in it. Trevor chuckled softly. "I'm sure she believes that." The remark sounded harmless. Yet something about it bothered Malcolm. In 6 years, Trevor had displayed nothing but patience and professionalism. Tonight, there was a hint of something else beneath his words. Satisfaction. The faintest, smallest note of it. As if proving the child wrong, mattered to him more than it should have. "It's late," Trevor continued. "Children misunderstand situations." Amara lowered her eyes again. Malcolm expected her to argue. Instead, she simply nodded. That reaction unsettled him more than anything else that had happened all night. People who invent stories defend them loudly. They argue. They double down. Amara looked, heartbroken. Not defensive. A cold breeze moved through the courtyard. Guests continued leaving the building. Luxury cars rolled past the valet station one by one. Malcolm rubbed his chin and glanced again toward the garage. Logic told him it was over. The vehicle was clean. There was no evidence. Trevor had been cleared. Yet that knot in his stomach was still there. Then something unexpected happened. Amara stepped slowly toward the SUV. "May I look at it?" she asked. Trevor laughed instantly. "You've caused enough confusion tonight." The answer came too fast. Malcolm noticed it immediately. So did she. I only want to look, she said. Trevor folded his arms. There's nothing to see. Malcolm stared at him. A strange silence settled across the courtyard. For a second, even Trevor seemed to realize how defensive he sounded. The smile returned, quick and practiced. I mean, the vehicle has already been checked. Malcolm looked from Trevor to Amara. The little girl wasn't staring at the doors or the windows. She was staring at the underside of the SUV. Her eyes traced the frame with intense concentration. Then she walked slowly toward the rear passenger side and crouched near the ground. Amara. Malcolm asked. She didn't answer. She leaned closer and studied something beneath the vehicle. Her brow furrowed. The silver bracelet slid down her wrist as she pointed. That's strange, she whispered. Malcolm followed her gaze. And Trevor's face lost its color. He stepped closer immediately. The courtyard fell silent despite the distant sounds of departing guests and engines humming beyond the gates. Amara remained crouched beside the rear wheel. What do you see? Malcolm asked. She pointed carefully. That bolt doesn't match the others. He lowered himself enough to follow her line of sight. At first glance, everything looked ordinary. The underside panel appeared secure. The frame looked untouched. Then he noticed it. Most of the visible fasteners carried the same dull metallic finish, slightly worn from months of road use. One bolt looked different. Newer. Cleaner. Almost as if it had been installed very recently. Trevor forced a laugh. Sir, vehicles are serviced all the time. Parts get replaced. His voice was casual. Almost casual enough. Malcolm looked up at him. Was any maintenance performed this week? Trevor hesitated. Less than a second. It felt much. Long hair. Routine maintenance, yes. Do you have the service report? A blink. Not with me. Malcolm slowly stood. That's unusual. Trevor adjusted his cufflink. The same nervous habit Malcolm had noticed earlier inside the ballroom. Amara remained focused on the underside of the SUV. There's something else, she whispered. What? See that mark? She pointed beside the newer bolt. A thin scrape crossed the edge of the panel. Not deep. Not dramatic. But frizz. The kind of mark, left by a tool. Malcolm pulled out his phone and called his head of security. Darren. Call me to the courtyard. Bring a vehicle technician. Trevor's face remained composed. His shoulders did not. Is that really necessary? Malcolm slipped the phone away. Probably not. It paused. But I'd rather be certain. 10 minutes later, Darren arrived with a technician carrying a flashlight and an inspection kit. The technician knelt beside the SUV and examined the underside panel for several long moments. His expression shifted from casual to focused. Then he looked up. This panel has definitely been removed recently. Trevor jumped in. That could have happened during maintenance. Possibly, the technician said. But these marks are fresh. Very fresh. Can you open it? Malcolm asked. The technician nodded and began loosening the newer fastener. Trevor watched without moving. Amara stood beside Malcolm, her small hands clasped in front of her. One bolt came free. Then another. The technician lowered a narrow section of the protective panel and shined his flashlight into the compartment behind it. His eyes widened. The beam revealed an empty mounting bracket hidden deep inside the frame. A bracket designed to hold something that was no longer there. The technician slowly looked up. Sir, he said quietly. Whatever was attached here was just removed. The flashlight beam hung steady on the empty bracket. Nobody spoke. An empty bracket by itself proved very little. But combined with everything that had happened that evening, it became impossible to ignore. Darren crouched beside the technician. What kind of equipment would fit in there? Several possibilities. A tracking unit. A communications device. Specialized monitoring hardware. The bracket is custom mounted. Malcolm's eyes shifted to Trevor. The driver stood perfectly still. You have an explanation? Malcolm asked. Trevor swallowed. No, sir. I've never seen that compartment before. The response arrived, too fast. Darren glanced toward Malcolm but said nothing. Years of security work had taught him the value of silence. It was there before, Amara whispered. Malcolm looked down at her. What makes you say that? Because when I saw him downstairs, he kept reaching under the vehicle. Trevor's voice sharpened. That's not true. The change in his tone caught everyone's attention. He noticed it immediately and softened. I mean, she must be mistaken. Amara didn't argue. She simply pointed toward the empty bracket. If nothing was there, why take it off tonight? The question settled across the courtyard like a weight. Trevor looked away. For the first time that night, he could not find an answer. Malcolm noticed everything. The tightening jaw. The restless hands. The nervous glance toward the parking garage. Small signs. Teeny cracks in the image Trevor had spent 6 years building. Darren Rossi. Sir, I want every security camera covering that garage reviewed. Now. 20 minutes later, the first surveillance report arrived. The last guests had gone. The ballroom still glowed behind the glass walls, but the staff had moved inside. Trevor stood quiet and unusually still. Amara sat on a stone bench beside the fountain, watching everyone with the same careful attention that had started the entire night. Darren's expression hardened as he scrolled through footage on his tablet. Sir, we found something. Malcolm stepped closer. Show me. The screen displayed a camera angle overlooking the lower garage. Clear enough to identify faces. A timestamp marked less than 2 hours earlier. Trevor entered the garage alone. He approached the SUV. He appeared to inspect it. Trevor folded his arms. Exactly what I told you. Darren didn't respond. He advanced the footage. A few moments later, another figure entered the frame. Gray jacket. Malcolm's pulse quickened. Amara had been. Right. The two men spoke near the rear passenger side of the SUV. No audio. The camera angle hid what their hands were doing. But the conversation lasted several minutes. Trevor shifted uneasily. That's one of the maintenance contractors. Name? Darren asked. Trevor hesitated. I'd have to check. Malcolm noticed it immediately. Trevor knew the names of every person who worked around company vehicles. Forgetting when was not in his nature. The footage continued. Then the man in the gray jacket walked away. Carrying a small rectangular case. No larger than a hardcover book. Pause it, Malcolm said. Darren froze the image. The case was clearly visible beneath the man's arm. Track him, Malcolm said. The footage led to a different camera. A different angle. The man in the gray jacket exited the garage. Crossed the rear service road. Entered the parking area reserved for support vehicles. Then disappeared from view. Several more minutes passed before another piece appeared. An analyst's voice came through Darren's tablet. Sir, we tracked the gray jacket individual for several more minutes using traffic cameras around the property. And he never left with the case. A confused silence followed. What do you mean he never left with it? Darren asked. The analyst pulled up another image. The same man entering the support vehicle parking area. A few minutes later, emerging empty-handed. The case stayed behind. Malcolm felt his pulse quicken. Search every vehicle in that lot. Already started. Trevor shifted his weight. Sir, this is becoming ridiculous. We still don't know what was even inside that case. Malcolm turned to him. That's exactly why we're continuing. Trevor opened his mouth. Closed it. Across the courtyard, Amara rose from the fountain bench and walked toward the group. The silver bracelet on her wrist caught the light as she looked at the screen. He hid it, she said quietly. Darren nodded. Appears that way. Waiting minutes, another message arrived. A support vehicle had been located. It belonged to a temporary transportation contractor hired for the gala. Malcolm waited for relief. It didn't come. Sir, Darren said slowly. There's another problem. What is it? A enlarged a maintenance record on the screen. The vehicle belongs to a contractor. But the contractor never entered the property tonight. Malcolm stared. Then who signed the vehicle in? Darren looked up. An internal employee account. Trevor's face went completely still. Whose account? Malcolm asked. Darren tapped the screen. A name appeared. Several long seconds passed before anyone could speak. The authorization had not come from Trevor. It had not come from security. It had not come from the event organizers. It belonged to someone inside Reed Global headquarters. A senior executive. Malcolm felt the ground shift beneath everything he thought he had understood. Someone with significant access had approved that vehicle. Someone powerful enough to bypass multiple layers of security. Trevor looked genuinely surprised for the first time all night. That can't be right, he said. Darren checked the record again. It is. Amara looked up at Malcolm. The man in the gray jacket wasn't the important one, was he? Malcolm slowly shook his head. The fountain rippled behind them. The city lights shimmered beyond the gates. Somewhere inside the company he had spent 20 years building, another secret had just opened its eyes. And for the first time that night, Malcolm understood that the real target of this investigation was no longer standing beside the SUV. It was someone he had trusted, for far, far longer. The name on the screen seemed impossible. Malcolm read it twice. Then a third time. Time, the result remained the same. Victor Langley. Chief Operations Officer of Reed Global. A man who had worked beside Malcolm for nearly 12 years. A man who had attended family birthdays. Christmas parties. The funeral of Malcolm's father. A man Malcolm had trusted with information worth billions of dollars. The courtyard fell silent except for the soft splash of the fountain. Darren looked equally stunned. We verified it twice. The authorization came directly from his credentials. Could someone have used his account? Possible. But unlikely. The login required multiple verification steps. Trevor lowered his head. The defiance was gone now. So was the polish. What remained was something more honest, and more uncomfortable. Defeat. Amara noticed it immediately. He already knows, she whispered. Malcolm turned. Trevor. Look at me. Several seconds passed before Trevor finally raised his head. The confidence that had defined him throughout the evening was nowhere to be found. Did Victor send that vehicle? Trevor said nothing. Darren folded his arms. Answer the question. Trevor closed his eyes briefly. The gesture itself was an answer. Malcolm felt disappointment settle across him, heavy and slow. Not anger. Not yet. Just disappointment. How long? He asked quietly. Trevor swallowed. Long enough. The words seemed to echo across the courtyard. Amara tightened her grip on her bracelet. Darren stared at Trevor in disbelief. You knew? Trevor nodded once. Not everything. Then tell me what you did know, Malcolm said. Trevor looked toward the dark parking garage. Victor said it was a company matter. It told me not to ask questions. And you agreed? A bitter laugh. I thought I was protecting my job. There was no excuse in his voice. No attempt to soften what had happened. Only regret. Malcolm looked away for a moment. The city skyline shimmered beyond the property gates. 20 years. Thousands of employees. Endless meetings. Endless sacrifices. And tonight, the warning that exposed everything had come, from an 8-year-old girl standing beside a fountain. Darren's phone rang. He answered immediately. The call lasted less than 30 seconds. When he hung up, his expression had changed. They found the case. Everyone froze. Where? Malcolm asked. Inside a storage compartment in the contractor vehicle. Trevor slowly sat down on the edge of a stone planter, as though his legs could no longer support him. The contents are being examined now. Malcolm felt his pulse quicken. This was the moment they had been chasing all night. The missing piece. The answer hidden behind the bracket, the garage meeting, the false authorization. But before he could look at the screen, he looked at Amara instead. The little girl stood quietly beneath the courtyard. Lights. Her expression thoughtful, not triumphant. She had never asked for attention. She had never demanded to be believed. She had simply spoken, when everyone else stayed silent. The security vehicle arrived less than 15 minutes later. 2 members of Darren's team stepped into the courtyard carrying the recovered case. Black. Unmarked. Rectangular. Small enough to fit beneath one arm. Yet every pair of eyes followed it like it contained the answer to a year of unanswered questions. Malcolm stood motionless beside the fountain. Trevor remained on the stone planter, staring at the ground. Amara watched quietly from a few feet away. The night air felt cooler now, carrying the scent of fresh grass and distant rain. One of the security officers carefully opened the case on a small table. The metal latches clicked loudly in the silence. Then the lid lifted. Darren leaned in first. His expression hardened immediately. Malcolm stepped closer. Inside rested several electronic devices. Not one. Several. Compact transmitters. Data storage modules. Specialized equipment designed to collect and transfer information. The technician shook his head slowly. These were not purchased at a local electronics store. This is professional equipment. Malcolm felt a chill move through him. Can you tell what it was used for? The technician examined one of the devices. Some of these can store enormous amounts of data. Others transmit information remotely. Darren looked toward Trevor. Information from what? Trevor closed his eyes. He already knew. Everyone could see it. The driver finally spoke. Victor said it was temporary. Malcolm stared at him. Temporary? Trevor nodded weakly. He told me it would only stay on the vehicle for a few weeks. And you believed him? Trevor laughed bitterly. I wanted to. The honesty hurt more than denial. Malcolm turned back toward the case. Years of business negotiations replayed through his mind. Confidential meetings. Expansion plans. Acquisition discussions. Private conversations during long rides between airports, offices, boardrooms. If someone had access to those conversations, the damage could be enormous. One of the security analysts connected a storage module to a secure laptop. Several tense minutes passed while encrypted files were examined. Then another discovery appeared. Sir, the analyst said quietly. You need to see this. Malcolm stepped closer. A series of records filled the screen. Dates. Times. Locations. Vehicle logs. Data transfers. Everything organized with disturbing precision. The records stretched back months. Far longer than anyone expected. Darren stared. This was systematic. Malcolm slowly nodded. The evidence no longer suggested a single mistake. It revealed a deliberate operation. A long-term effort. A carefully hidden chain of actions designed to stay invisible. Trevor looked exhausted now. "I never saw those files," he said quietly. "Victor only told me where to park, and who to let into the garage." Malcolm believed him. Not because Trevor deserved trust at that moment, but because the evidence pointed somewhere much higher. The driver had created the opportunity. Someone else had designed the plan. Across the courtyard, Amara looked toward the glowing laptop screen. She did not understand the technical details. She did not need to. Even she could see the truth unfolding. The warning she had whispered hours earlier had grown into something far larger than anyone imagined. And as the final reports continued loading onto the screen, Malcolm realized that by sunrise, the entire leadership team of Reed Global would be forced to confront a truth that could no longer remain hidden. The first light of dawn was beginning to touch the Atlanta skyline when the final pieces fell into place. The courtyard that had been filled with donors and music and laughter only hours earlier now felt completely different. Security personnel moved quietly between vehicles. Analistas reviewed records inside temporary workstations. Phones rang with urgent conversations. And standing beside the fountain, Malcolm Reed watched the truth unfold with a clarity he had not expected when the night began. Shortly after midnight, Victor Langley had been contacted and asked to appear immediately. He arrived believing he could explain everything away. That confidence lasted less than 10 minutes. They recovered records. The garage footage. The authorization logs. The equipment inside the case. Together, they formed a picture too complete to escape. Faced with the evidence, Victor's explanation slowly unraveled. Excuses turned to silence. Silence turned to a quiet, terrible kind of stillness. By the end of the meeting, his position inside Reed Global was finished. Trevor sat quietly throughout the process. He did not defend himself. He accepted responsibility for the choices he had made and cooperated with every question. The disappointment Malcolm felt remained deep. But the anger had faded. What remained instead was a sobering realization. About trust. About leadership. About the danger of ignoring small warnings simply because they came from small voices. As the investigation teams continued their work, Malcolm found himself searching the courtyard for someone else. Amara was gone. A brief panic moved through him. He looked near the fountain. Near the garage entrance. Near the service doors. Finally Darren pointed toward the catering wing. "I think she's over there." Malcolm followed his direction. He found her sitting quietly beside her and near a stack of supply carts. She looked exhausted. The long night had finally caught up with her. Yet when she saw Malcolm approaching, she stood politely. "Did they find out what happened?" she asked. He smiled softly. "Yes. They did." She nodded as if that answer alone was enough. She didn't ask for details. She didn't ask for recognition. She simply seemed relieved that the truth had been discovered. Malcolm looked at the silver bracelet on her wrist. The same bracelet he had seen reflecting the ballroom lights, the courtyard lights, the glow of computer screens. The bracelet that had moved through every hour of this strange, impossible night. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure. Why did you come tell me in the first place?" She thought for a moment. Then she looked up at him with an honesty no boardroom could ever produce. "Because if something feels wrong, and nobody says anything, then nothing ever gets better." Malcolm stood silent. The answer was simple. Honest. Powerful. More powerful than any speech, any donation, any rehearsed remark from any guest who had attended the gala that night. Around them, the city was waking up. Morning sunlight painted the buildings gold. Birds crossed the brightening sky. For the first time in hours, Malcolm felt a kind of peace. He extended his hand. She looked surprised before slowly reaching out and shaking it. "Thank you," he said. "You helped more people tonight than you'll probably ever know." She smiled. A real smile. The kind that needed no reward. As Malcolm walked back toward the courtyard, he glanced once more at the black SUV parked beneath the fading lights. Hours earlier, it had seemed like the center of the mystery. Now, it felt like something else entirely. A reminder. A reminder that the truth often arrives from places no one expects. A reminder that courage does not depend on age, or wealth, or status. And a reminder that on one ordinary night, in one ordinary city, the smallest voice in the room turned out to be the one worth hearing most.